Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Deep Rock Galactic. Today we're doing another primary weapon breakdown video, and this time we are doing it for the engineer. Now the engineer is in a bit of an interesting position when it comes to his primary weapons because there's a lot of variety between all of his primary weapons. And as a result, it can sometimes be very confusing to know when and where to use his particular primary weapons. So today we're going to go through and talk about each of his primary weapons in terms of their strengths, their weaknesses, any sort of noteworthy overclocks that they might have that might improve the weapon or give it some sort of different gameplay style, some good mission types to take each individual weapon on, and also some good mutators to be on the lookout for. So without further ado, let's just get right into the video. So first up, we have the Warthog Auto Shotgun. This thing is probably one of my favorite primary weapons in the game, and it is an absolute workhorse. It is very reliable, it deals solid burst damage, and is actually solid at close to medium and even to some long ranges depending on how you have it kitted out. It's also one of the most comfortable feeling weapons, at least in my personal opinion, and it just has that sort of sleek and elegant design to it. Now the thing most people mention when talking about the Warthog is its Turret Whip mod in Tier 5. What Turret Whip does is it allows you to fire a round at your sentry gun and cause the sentry to fire out a high explosive, high powered shot that is capable of dealing good damage to single targets and also breaking up big groups of enemies. It is very useful and very versatile and is one of the core aspects of the Warthog shotgun and what gives it a lot of its power. And a lot of people think that the shotgun is only really useful when it comes to using the Turret Whip and it doesn't really have a whole lot of use outside of that, but I would tend to disagree with that a lot because especially with some of the changes the shotgun has got recently, it is significantly more powerful as its own standalone weapon and does not need to rely nearly as much on Turret Whip as it did in the past. It still definitely is by far the most efficient way to increase its damage output, but if you're in a bad situation or if your turrets are out of ammo, you are not completely out of options when it comes to using the shotgun. And this leads us to the shotgun's main strength, which is its versatility. It is good in just about any situation you can think of. It can handle swarms of enemies, it can deal decent damage to bigger targets, although you might not take them out quite as quickly as some of the other options the engineer has or that some of the other classes have access to. And again, it synergizes very well with the engineer's turrets and honestly the rest of his kit very well, to the point where you can pretty much fit this into just about any build setup that you want. I like to think of it as kind of the Swiss Army knife of the engineer's kit. It does just a little bit of everything. It functions very well in very strong defensive build setups. Anything that relies heavily on your sentry guns, if you're running double sentries, this is a phenomenal choice to take. And it's also incredibly easy to use because it's very straightforward. Now, the biggest weakness that the shotgun has is its lack of heavy damage at long range. Again, it does have a decent amount of range, especially for a shotgun, but it's still not going to be nearly as effective as something like the Scout's M1000 or the Smart Rifle, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And also, unless you have it built out a certain way, you really don't have a whole lot of fast, sustained damage output. It's very slow firing for the most part, unless you have a couple different setups. And once an enemy gets about 30 meters away or so, its damage fall off is going to be pretty significant. Now, you are able to improve the Warthog in a lot of ways with several of its overclocks. Some very noteworthy ones that are really good at improving its damage output are things like magnetic pellet alignment, which give it a lot more accuracy, or cycle overload, which can really make the rate of fire insane. And then my personal favorite overclock for the shotgun that I got recently, the pump action, makes it way stronger and it definitely makes the Warthog feel a lot more powerful, especially without the use of Turret Whip. It makes it hit like a truck, it gives it blow through rounds, and it just makes it significantly more stronger. And then talking about good mission types to bring the Warthog on, again, since it's very versatile and it's useful in many different situations, you can really bring this on just about any mission type you want and it'll be perfectly fine. But if you're looking for some more specifics, mining expeditions are obviously a good choice because it's very consistent. You're going to be fighting enemies throughout the course of the entire dive, which means they're going to be coming at you very often, which is a good situation for the Warthog to be in. Salvage operations are also a good pick because since they are very heavy defense focused and the Warthog naturally just does very good in defensive situations, the salvage operations are a good choice for it. And the same thing kind of goes for deep scan. You're going to be defending a lot as you're collecting the resonance crystals, and during the actual descent of the drill elevator itself, you have a lot of opportunities to use the shotgun either as its own or also to use it for its turret whip shots, because the tunnel that you create when going down the drill elevator is just a natural firing line that you can use very effectively. And then finally, some good mutators. Elite Threat is a good choice because the shotgun allows you to get some very good burst damage out on those big tough enemies to help take chunks out of them and to take them out pretty quickly. Regenerative Bug Warthogs is also a good one because it does a lot of good damage per shot. You're able to take out most smaller threats immediately before they even have the chance to heal, which is really nice. And then Mactera Plague is also a good one because you are able to do some very strong damage to the Mactera when they get up close to you. And if you take a very good heavy stun setup, you can basically lock them down with no trouble whatsoever. Next up, we have the Stubby Voltaic SMG. This little guy trades raw damage output per shot for status effect and utility. The Stubby is not going to be able to delete large targets necessarily, but instead it's going to hinder the entire swarm effectively. The Stubby and me have always kind of had a bit of a weird relationship. I've never really been too fond of the Stubby outside of a couple of builds, but I still cannot deny its sheer raw usability and versatility when it comes to slowing down and debilitating enemies. The biggest strength that the Stubby SMG has is electricity and crowd control. Every shot that the Stubby fires out has a chance to electrocute enemies, slowing them down and giving them a damage over time effect, which is incredibly useful. Stubby might not have the rawest high DPS that I mentioned earlier, but its ability to slow down enemies and apply constant damage and elemental debuffs make it a fantastic support weapon. It is also the best tool for the engineer in any kind of elemental setup, either for himself or his teammates. If you're running any kind of status effect or elemental build, this is the weapon that you want to bring with it. If you have a scout that's running conductive thermals, or basically anybody else who's running any kind of build that leeches off of status effects, the Stubby is phenomenal for that. The main weakness with the Stubby, as I mentioned earlier, is its low overall DPS. That's not to say that you can't build it out for some strong DPS options, and it does have a couple of things that you can use with it, such as things like well-oiled machine or hyperalloy assembly. Those can give you good raw overall damage output, but for the most part, the Stubby is meant to be a tool that is used in conjunction with the rest of the engineer's kit. You really aren't going to be using the Stubby on its own. You really need the rest of the engineer's kit in order to make this thing work effectively, and as such, its damage output is going to be relatively low. Now, where the Stubby does thrive in is its overclock choices. It has some really good options. You have things like EM Refire Booster just to give you a lot more shock damage, and then things like Microconductor Add-on and Turret EM Discharge, which allow you to, similar to the Warthog, use your turrets in an incredibly valuable way. Microconductor Add-on allows you to supercharge your turrets to make an electric fence between them, as well as your platforms, which is incredible. And Turret EM Discharge basically just turns your sentry guns into shocker grenades that you can trigger whenever you want just by firing the weapon at the turret. I will say that the Stubby is also probably the most intricate weapon that the engineer has access to, so learning how to use its overclocks effectively and how to use it not just as a weapon but as a tool for the rest of his kit is probably one of the most important things you need to know when picking up this weapon. In terms of good mission types for the Stubby, basically any sort of heavy defense operation is really good. Escort duty is phenomenal because you have the ability to control a wide area with basically anything that the Stubby has access to. Industrial sabotage is also a good one because you're going to be defending a lot during the hacking systems, and you're also going to be covering a large amount of area during the actual caretaker fight, although you might not be able to do a lot to the caretaker itself. And then similar to the Warthog, Deep Scan is a great choice because you can control a large area, especially during the actual descent. But in essence, essentially anything where you are going to be in a defensive position for a long period of time is a great choice. And then good mutators, lethal enemies is a very good choice for this one because while it may not necessarily be able to delete enemies very quickly, you can stop them from getting to you and your teammates, which is very valuable because the enemies are going to be hitting a lot harder. And then things like parasites and Swarmageddon, which send a lot of smaller threats towards you, are going to be really nice because since the Stubby has low per shot damage but a very high rate of fire, you can melt through all of those small enemies incredibly fast, which in turn can take a lot of pressure off of your team. Then finally, we have the Lock 1 Smart Rifle, or the Loki Rifle as I like to call it. This is definitely the most high-tech weapon in the engineer's lineup, and honestly, probably the entire class's lineup if I'm being honest with you. The weapon locks onto enemies and fires homing shots, making it incredibly precise and easy to use. Think of the Smart Pistol from Titanfall 2, but in a much bigger scale. It also by far has the longest range out of any of the engineer's primary weapons. That being said, it does have a lot of technical differences that can make it a little bit more difficult to use, especially when you're a newer player, and it might be a little bit intimidating or confusing to use at first. Now, the Loki's biggest strength is its precision and ease of use when you know how to use it. As I said, when you're first starting off, it might be a little bit confusing, but once you get the hang of this weapon, it literally fires itself, which is incredibly useful. It's perfect for hitting weak spots with minimal effort, especially once you figure out the way that it locks on properly. And ironically, even though I said that it can be sometimes a little bit difficult for new players to get the hang of, once they do get the hang of it, it is really good for players who struggle with aiming because it literally does it for you. Smart Rifle rewards patience, methodical playstyle, and makes it a unique, powerful option for the engineer as it allows him to minimize his missed shots or use his shots as efficiently as possible. It gives you full control over the things that you're shooting at and allows you to know exactly what it is that you are targeting and taking out. Now, the biggest weakness of the Smart Rifle are two main things. Number one, as I said, it can be a little bit intimidating, at least for newer players to learn. But more importantly, it is also the only primary weapon in the engineer's kit that does not interact with any of his sentry guns. Now, that's not to say that it's not good, because just because it doesn't interact with the sentry guns, that doesn't make it effective. But a lot of what makes the other two weapons very powerful is the fact that they have really good interactions with the engineer's sentry guns. The Warthog and its turret whip is beyond powerful. It's able to take out very big chunks of enemies and just take pressure off of you and the entire team. And the Stubby basically can only really function very well when you're using it on the sentry guns. Using things like microconductor add-on or turretium discharge, as I mentioned earlier, it makes the Stubby feel so strong. But in terms of the Smart Rifle, it doesn't actually have anything that interacts with the engineer's sentry guns, which make it feel like it's always just missing something a little bit. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have ways that it can make itself even better, because it has a lot of very strong overclocks. Things like explosive chemical rounds are phenomenal, and it really makes the Smart Rifle stand out. It can make it do a lot more damage and do good at both ad control and single target damage. Seeker rounds is great if you're somebody who really just does not want to think about aiming, because not only does the Smart Rifle aim for you, but the Seeker rounds make it so that way you don't have to worry about missing or lacking in full damage, because it makes it so that way you do full damage no matter what. And Smart Trigger OS is fun and can definitely make the damage output feel a lot more intense and can make it feel even easier to use, although you will burn through ammo a lot quicker. And there are a lot of more interesting overclocks that the Smart Rifle has to work with, and they all change the weapon in a very interesting way. Now, talking about good mission types for the Smart Rifle, again, it can pretty much be useful in just about any situation, but eliminations are great because since it has the most range and the most accuracy, you can hit the dreadnoughts very easily, especially if you have things like Seeker rounds or Smart Trigger OS, you can take them out very quickly. Sabotage missions are great as well, because since you are going to be fighting bots a lot, they fly around, they don't want to stand still, so if you're having trouble hitting your shots, this can make it much easier for you. And on-site refinings are also a good choice, because since there's going to be a lot of enemies and a very wide area that you need to cover, this can help you take out big swarms of enemies that are fanning out and covering a wide area very well. And then good mutators, again, Elite Threat is a good choice because it allows you to quickly pick out the elite threats and prioritize them, which can be very nice. Regenerative bugs is also a good one because, again, you can take things out pretty quickly, especially if you have things like explosive chemical rounds. And Mactera Plague is also good for similar reasons as fighting the bots in Industrial Sabotage. You have the ability to pick them out of the sky very easily, which means you don't have to worry about aiming nearly as much. And there you have it. All of the primary weapons for the engineer explained. Hopefully I did this a little bit better than I did the gunner one. I know I kind of mixed up some of my phrases with the gunner weapons guide, so I apologize for that as well. And like I said, the engineer's weapons are a little bit more complicated. There's a lot more to think about and a lot more that go into each of them, but they are still very useful. But let me know down below what your favorite engineer primary weapon is and what your favorite overclock to use for it is as well. And as always, I hope you found this video informative and entertaining. If you did, please be sure to let me know by hitting that like button and consider becoming a member and subscribing today, as it really helps me out a lot. Rocket Stone Miners, I'll see you in the next video.